lasagna. That 666 that gematria. With the cleans, with the kids on genitalia. Yeah, they filming and they stalking, no they watching ya. No they watching ya, don't let them pry on ya. Inside your fucking head like some Tylenol. Death by numbers, area 51. They try to shut you up when you want to some.
You started your podcast 10 years ago?
No, longer than that. I think it was 2006.
Oh, wow.
It was a different world. It wasn't anything like today. Podcasting is just what you did to either put it on your site. You might put a player on MySpace. You really needed, if you wanted something like a subscription or a far reach, you had to pay a lot of money, like coast to coast or something. But yeah, it was a very small and personal thing in those days. It only got, the golden age really only started, like 5 years ago, if that.
So, when you started in 2006, you started with Aeon Byte? That was the first name of the show?
No, it used to be called Coffee, Cigarettes, and Gnosis.
That's actually a great name.
Yeah, it was a great name. Sometimes I wish I hadn't changed it, but again, it was that was the world. It was a small, quaint, personal thing, so it seemed to make it a very personal and cozy atmosphere for the listeners, so I just called it Coffee, Cigarettes, and Gnosis.
So, what does Aeon Byte mean for those who don't know?
Well, for those who don't know, and I don't even know, it came to me actually in my 20s. I had a dream about this character called Aeon Byte, and back then I was completely Catholic. I don't know, it just came to me, and she was this sort of super heroine in space. And I wrote a short story, I got it published, and then I forgot about it. And then as I was doing Coffee, Cigarettes, and Gnosis, it came back to me. I was sort of, again, maybe 5 years or so, I started the podcast, and again, the golden age of podcasts was coming. You're able to submit it to iTunes through an RSS feed. I said, well, I'm going to rebrand, and the name came back to me because I realized that heroine I had a vision of or dreamt about reminded me a lot about Sofia, the Gnostic goddess or main heroine of the Gnostic myths, sometimes anti-heroine or villain even. So I just rebranded, and it made sense because Aeon, most people assume Aeon means a period of time, but to the ancients it could mean a lot more. It could mean a place, it could mean eternity, it could mean a sort of aspect of the divine mind. And Byte just made sense, a sort of like futuristic term, so it was sort of a blending of the ancient and the modern into a show, so I just called it Aeon Byte. But yeah, at the end of the day, it has to do with Sofia.
And who is Sofia? Because you've referenced Sofia almost in a Luciferian archetype, if you will. Does that make sense?
Yeah, as
Okay.
sort of a fallen being that brings enlightenment to humanity, that is a trickster, but is also a challenger of people to become better. Sophia would definitely fall under that archetype, Luciferian trickster, very much like Hermes or Prometheus or the Coyote, or so many figures you find in mythology. But in the Gnostic account, she is as I mentioned, to the Gnostics, heaven or the pleroma, whatever you want to call it, the immaterial world was really sort of a giant mind. It was a giant imagination with all aspects of the divine mind. And these aspects were called Aeons, as I just mentioned. There were potential personhoods of the great consciousness trying to know itself. As it awoke, it created characteristics like we do. We wake up and suddenly all these modes and aspects are constructed of who we are. That is the way with the divine mind. And in the Gnostic account, Sophia was the wisdom of God, but she rebels. They have different reasons why she rebels, but because of her rebellion, she is cast out of the pleroma, as the Gnostics call their version of heaven, the idealized world. And takes over the universe and steals her power, and the part of her power, he creates humans, and he becomes sort of this tyrant god or manager of the universe. And it's Sophia's task in the Gnostic accounts, many of them, to sort of rescue her own power and to help human beings waken to their own divine nature, that we are trapped in a sort of prison planet, or as Philip K. Dick called it, the Black Iron Prison, and to escape this universe, or at the very least restore. And of course, Sophia is known in other traditions. In Judaism, she's known as the Shekinah of God. You can read in the Old Testament about this wisdom that is lost, and she's crying out for her people, and she was with God at the beginning of creation. And you find her in Proverbs and Ecclesiasticus. So she's basically the wisdom divine aspect or archetypal image in Gnosticism. Again, you can associate it with the Shekinah in Judaism, maybe with Isis, Athena in the Greek pantheon. If you remember the myth of Athena, Zeus, who's the ruler of the universe, or the ultimate god, has a headache, and Athena sprouts out of his brain, and she becomes, the goddess, and Zeus is never himself, and that's very much a parallel to the myths of Sophia. So you could call her goddess, but she's more accurately an Aeon, the aspect or potential of the greater ultimate consciousness. I hope that makes sense.
No, it makes a ton of sense, man. Well, at least to me. And in one of your fantastic intros, and it was super powerful to me during some of your intros. What I often do is, because I drive a truck for a living, not like a semi, but like one of those 26-foot box trucks. And so in between stops, I deliver out in like rural Texas. So I got like about 20-30 minutes in between stops sometimes. And what I'll do is I'll pause the podcast and I'll just reflect on what was just said. And so during some of your intros, I find the movie quotes and sometimes what you say really compelling. So I'll pause it and I'll try and think about what was just said. And one of them was, Sophia weeps for your success. And I was like, whoa, that's a powerful statement. I was wondering if you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, well, I mean, what I love about the myth of Sophia, the Gnostic Sophia, is the multiplicity of meanings and interpretations that you can come up with. After all, I mean, you can talk about it psychologically. We all are seeking wisdom in our lives to be able to bring our mind together, as you can call it, to be individuated. And if we can get our mind together and our thoughts together and our other, wage war, exploit each other, exploit the land. So somehow we have lost our wisdom, like Zeus lost Athena, and we have to restore that wisdom so we can basically become whole again.
One thing that I think about when you say all of that, I remember your conversation with Alex Sekiris and the question of evil. And while you guys were having that conversation, again, I paused the podcast and I thought to myself, well, what if the Archons, the Demiurge was birthed from Sofia, what if that is all an elaborate plan to test us, to make us advance to the higher realms or the next realm, or to meet Abraxas? And we could also talk about what is or who is Abraxas. But what about that fact that the Archons, they're feeding off of our energy, but they're also in a way helping us to better ourselves, are they not?
Yeah, you could say that. I mean, as some have noticed, including Carl Jung, the Demiurge is a great representation of the twisted or warped or disconnected ego. There is that passage in Isaiah where Jehovah or Yahweh goes, "I am a jealous God and there is no God but me." And that's how our egos who are disconnected will manifest in the world. I am the only guy and there's nobody but me. We ignore our interior worlds, which could be the pleroma, as the Hermetic saying goes, as above, so below, as outside, so within. Everything's connected, everything's interactive, the macrocosm and the microcosm. So the Archons are certainly what you might call, in a Jungian term, our shadow selves. They are the aspects of us that we don't want to face, but some of them are negative, and the only way to get around it is to integrate within them. As some scholars have said, the Archons are simply the many characteristics of the Demiurge, his negative aspects, his twisted view of the world that manifest in this world, because the Archons always have negative qualities of names like jealousy or envy. Some rule the planet, some are sort of warped ideals of justice, but they have power and they basically run the universe and run our fates. So one way to see it is, yes, we do have to integrate them, because when the Demiurge creates the world or fashions the world, he sort of has a remembrance of, he has some of the soul of Sophia, so he remembers the higher realms. So he fashions the world as his remembrance or memory of the higher realms, but it comes out all crappy. And that's, of course, the great lesson. When we let our egos go forward without consulting our wisdom, our intuition, our memory, and we just go forward, then things always end up sort of warped, like a bizarro version of the world. So in a sense, yeah, I can see that the Archons are supposed to be integrated. Even the Gnostic myths, at the end of the world, everything gets taken up to its source, and everything maybe starts over in some of the accounts. And even in some, the Demiurge himself is redeemed. He sort of comes to his senses, and he helps all this light go back to its source, and everything begins how it was before. It's just one primordial consciousness.
There's nothing new under the sun, right? I mean, I want to do a podcast on colloquialisms, because I think that some of them ring so true. Like, there's nothing new under the sun. And I was talking to Max Egan, and he has brought up the fact that, throughout periods of history, we've seen, millions or hundreds of thousands of children just show up out of nowhere. Like, no parents, no nothing, just a ton of kids. And it's almost like they take a bunch of kids and set them to the side, and then the world goes through this great cataclysm. Like this, I'm really into this MD Zach Bush right now, and he talks about how there's been 6 great extinction events, and we're in the midst of the 6th one right now. And I think about humanity during the prior 5, and again, going back to my conversation with Max Egan, what if they've just done this 5 other times where Klaus Schwab gets up there and says he wants to do the Great Reset, and then humanity has this existential crisis to face, and so far the prior 5 times they didn't figure it out and they got wiped out by the Technopoly, and now we're in the 6th phase of seeing if we can finally overcome this. And that seems to me to be a Gnostic way of looking at things.
Yeah, you could say so. I mean, in the accounts, there was always changing of the ages. Like the Gnostics reinterpreted a lot of what the Old Testament said. They claimed that Moses got it wrong, and they had the right interpretation, and so forth. So, for example, the flood is actually created by the Archons to wipe out humanity because we were getting too wise and we were starting to figure out what was going on in the prison planet, in the Matrix, the Black Iron Prison. And Sodom and Gomorrah was actually enlightened people who also were figuring it out. So the Demiurge basically has to wipe humanity when they start getting too close to the truth, and sometimes just out of pure spite, because these Archons are always jealous of us because we have truly the divine spark, and we are sort of this perfect place where the material and the divine meet. As Terry Pratchett said, we are where the fallen angel meets the rising ape. So sometimes they'll wipe us out if we learn too much. So, but I wouldn't get too hung up on these things. I mean, it's no secret we are at the end of the Kali Yuga in Hinduism, beginning of the age of Aquarius, and yeah, these ages will change, but all we can do is just know ourselves and know what our purpose is, and go into that inner journey to find out, again, our sacred purpose and our own divinity. So once we find out, then yeah, we'll figure things out, and all the shit being thrown at us from the outside won't matter, because ultimately it's an illusion, ultimately it's a distraction, and it's a dog and pony show by that wickedness in high places, as Paul called the Archons.
So what does the quote "know thyself" mean to you? Because you kind of just referenced that while you were speaking. Because I know some people think it's almost a pejorative, like know your place, or is
That's
how.
what some have said,
Yeah,
Some
yeah.
have said from the Oracle at Delphi, it's know thyself. Gnosis Southon, I believe. I'm sure I'm pronouncing it wrong, but some have said, yes, it means know your place, know your role. It's like we're all in a case system, and we just got to do what we do without questioning. And I think it was, I forgot what play it is. There's an ancient play with Prometheus where he's like, man, I'm tired of Zeus' shit. We got to do something. Prometheus creates the humans in the Greek myths, and Prometheus is not happy that the Olympians have overthrown the Titans, and Zeus is being, meet the new boss, same as the old boss shit. And his Oceanus, another Titan, goes, Prometheus, you're out of place, man. You're going to get punished. And he says, know thyself, but some translations say know your place. Like Prometheus, don't rock the boat, stay in your lane, don't talk too much, watch out if you're on Twitter, you'll get banned, all that other good stuff. But of course Prometheus doesn't listen, because he is like Sophia, Luciferian. He is an enlightener, and he's always going to try to help those that need help, those that are lower than him. Others say no, it's a positive message, but that's a debate. I know in the Gnostic sense, there is a lot about self-knowledge. A part of what the Gnostics thrive for is something called gnosis, a divine knowledge of the higher realms, and an understanding of the falseness of this world, the illusion that this world, or the bad software, virtual reality hell that we lived in. Gnosis might be associated with like taking the red pill and the white pill and the black pill all at once. And part of your knowledge is knowing not just the divine world, the world of God and the message of Sophia, but knowing who you are. In other words, getting underneath all the us are 99% of what we are is complete a lie. It's been programmed by our culture, by our parents, by our churches, by TV, propaganda, marketing, and the rest. The rest too is just our lizard and monkey brains trying to survive in the material world for the next meal, or sex, or shelter. But there is that 1% of us that is truly divine. That is, again, it's that divine spark, that shard of infinity. That is our true self, and that is eternal. That is the mind of God and the ultimate soul. So it was very important for the Gnostic, when it came to self-knowledge, to dig through all the bullshit that we are, through introspection, through meditation, through contemplation of the world, through ecstatic rituals. The Gnostics were all about out-of-body experiences and astral flights. But through these rituals, find out the part of you that is God. In fact, there are Gnostic texts that say, if you know yourself, you will know God. If you know you are God, you will rule over the all, because you will be, again, invulnerable to the powers of this universe to keep you asleep, to keep you ignorant, and to deny your divine inheritance beyond the stars.
Damn, that's deep.
I suppose.
Yeah. But
It seems pretty common sense when you think.
yeah, no, 100%, at least to us. But then, what my next question is why is Gnosis acquiring all of this knowledge, taking all of the pills, every single kind of colored pill, every pill under the rainbow you want to take? Why is that so important? And I'm a big fan of the Propaganda Report, Monica Perez and Brad Binkley, but they actually had a listener write in and say, I'm unsubscribing, I'm never listening again, not because of anything that you guys did, but God created us to be innocent and ignorant, like in the Garden of Eden, and so therefore I can't be listening to things about the Boston Marathon bombing and these kinds of things. And then, I'm listening to you guys, and you guys are talking about the Gnostics said that ignorance is like the greatest sin of all. And I'm right under that line, man. I'm about acquiring as much knowledge as possible, but do you have anything to say about that?
No, I understand the point. Sometimes we want to be like Cypher in the Matrix. So why did I take the blue pill? I want the taste of steak and the wine, and I want to go back to when I didn't know shit, and life was just going to the movies and working your job. But as a friend of mine, Beth Martin, said very wisely, when you lose your ignorance, you don't lose your innocence. Your innate innocence is eternal. It is a part of you that, as Jesus says, sees the world through the eyes of a child at every moment. So just because you are shown the horrors of the universe, I think, was it the Mysterium Tremendo, I believe it was Joseph Campbell or Mircea Eliade said, you see the horror of the universe, that this is a place of death, temporality, this is a place of war and viruses and human beings doing terrible things to each other, and animals eating animals and all that. It is a horror, but at the same time, if you can sit there and stare into this abyss, you will also know what you call the Mysterium Fascinante, the awe of the mystery. You see the awe of the horror and the awe of the beauty of the universe. You see both. You see the divine and you see the darkness. And I think a lot of what Gnosis will give you is that you're able to hold in one hand, or with one eye, you see the evil, the darkness, the terrible things that people do. But on the other hand, you see the beauty, the divinity in everything, the powers of the Aeons, and you can hold it back. But at the end of the day, your innocence will never be threatened. What is being threatened is your ego, and what is being threatened is what's being challenged is your hero's journey to move forward and face the adventure you're supposed to be going on. But I understand that people just don't want to, they're not ready in this lifetime. They're dominated by fear. They'd rather live in ignorance because it's an easy way out. But ultimately, they're just asking for more this lifetime or the next lifetime. So you just gotta do it sometimes.
Yeah, and a saying that I've adopted just recently, actually, within the last couple of weeks or a month, because I get so upset with some of my friends from back home or family members that just don't get it. And lately, I've been reminded of the Jesus quote when he's up on the cross. It's like, God forgive them, for they do not know. And it's just like, you know what? I mean, that's just the philosophy. I mean, we can try and bring gnosis to our friends and family all we want, but at the end of the day, I mean, if they're just stymied in their ways, or they're heavily propagandized and fluoridated, or like whatever you want to say, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, they're just going to be arrogantly ignorant, and there's nothing that you can do about it. But what I wanted to ask you was, what do you say? Some Christians would say that Gnosticism is actually covert Satanism or Luciferianism, or that you guys are actually worshiping. I don't want to say you guys, but that Gnostics were, flirting with, the left-hand path, the dark side, and that kind of stuff.
Well, you could say it is left-hand path, and you could say it's the darkness. They were entertaining these things. They were studying the Archons. They were trying to understand the Archons, and some of them they're actually trying to manipulate the Archons through magical passwords and spell work and all that. But at the end of the day, they drew a line in the sand between what was right and what was wrong. These are the Archons, we're against it. This is the cosmic Jesus and Sophia, and we're on this side. So they made no bones about it, but it is left-hand path, because the left-hand path originally starts out by you rejecting God, and by the Gnostics would say it's the Demiurge. They say we reject the God of this world, all his works, all his kingdoms, everything else, and we're going to find out who we are as an individual first. What is our mission? Who we are at our core, and then we'll worry about the gods and dealing with the gods. So left-hand path is very individualistic, and some Gnostic sects did definitely do very, you might say, questionable rituals like sex magic and theogens, everything. But this was all done for altered states of consciousness. This was done to leave their body and take the astral flights and commune with this supreme consciousness, and to be able to integrate with Sophia in this universe. But for the whole satanic thing, let's put it this way. When the Gnostics came out, the early church fathers and Christians never called them satanic or evil. They thought they were a threat to society. Their ideas were dangerous. They were too anarchist. They were too individualistic. They didn't believe in following orders and being part of a church. But they always knew that they were for the powers of good, and that they were into Jesus, just as they were into other sort of messengers of light. They just hated the Gnostic interpretation of the Old Testament, their interpretation of Jesus and the apostles and all that. So that's where there was this huge animosity and friction with the early church fathers, the bishops, and the Gnostics. But never did they say, well, they're working for Satan or something like that. They were just heretics. I mean, a heretic is simply somebody who can be redeemed, I think. But again, of course, in this day and age, it becomes fashionable. It is, if I don't like what you say, you're satanic. If I don't like what you say, you're alt-right. If I don't like what you say, you're social. This
Yeah.
sort of, silly words we throw around. You're fascist, but they don't mean anything, and there's no self-introspection or context to these words.
So, I've heard you reference that Sophia and Jesus is actually a love story as old as time. I think you've put it. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, if we look at archetypes, which are the primordial building blocks of the universe and consciousness, as Carl Jung talked about, there's always a great archetype of the lovers. In the Gnostic myths, you have these Aeons are usually put in pairs. The mind of God sort of spills out its characteristics, the great consciousness. Sophia and Jesus are like the last of these couples, and maybe the most important one. And then Sophia disobeys, or she does what she does. Sometimes it doesn't get her, and she falls down into the world of matter, into the matrix. And it's Jesus' idea to come down, and he becomes part of her rescue operation. She helps him. I mean, he helps her to restore the light sparks and basically help with the healing of the universe. So in a lot of the texts, again, they are basically a couple. Some of the texts, they change things around because the Gnostics always were tweaking with these stories because each person would have a different vision, and they'd write down their vision. As you know, two people can never write down the same vision. It's just not going to. In this day and age, two people can't even agree on the same news story. They see completely different things, if you've noticed, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Some will say, my God, Biden's a hero. Somebody say, God, he's an ass. You know, he's an asshole.
Yeah.
So they were writing and tweaking these stories. And in some, Sophia is actually the mother of Jesus and Satan. She gives birth to them, and they're both fighting into, for the universe. This is later. As the Gnostics, as time progressed, the Satan started replacing the Demiurge as the bad guy. So again, it's the archetype of evil or the archetype of darkness, but the names slowly started changing. So you have this great ideal, and this is something that the Greeks believed in, and the Romans. You've got logos, which is the reason of God, the male, sort of logical, constructive engineering part of God. But then you have wisdom, the more lunar, intuitive, mystical aspect of God. So you've got logos, and you've got Sophia, wisdom. So to the Gnostics, logos was Jesus. The Gospel of John does say in the beginning was the logos. You translate it in English as word, but it's actually a mistranslation. It should be in the beginning was the logos. And you've got Sophia. When the male reason and the female wisdom get together, you really get the most supreme state of existence that you have. And we can go back to Plato's myth of the Timaeus of the hermaphrodite. Once humans were one gender, and then Zeus had to split them up because they were too powerful. Or these ideas happen, of course, through they manifest as a love story, King Arthur and Guinevere, but I think at its core, at its primordial state, we're talking about the marriage of wisdom and reason.
Yeah, I had heard you mention that on a different show about how we were divided by the sexes, and I was actually listening to this African priest guy. I guess he was very influential. I'd never heard of him until a few weeks back, but I was listening to one of his lectures that he was giving, and he was talking about this kind of like demiurge figure called Umbaba, and how humans, there was no sex, there were no words, we communicated telepathically, but then he gave us the gift of language, which divided us all throughout the world, and then he gave us the gift of sex, so we could be one with each other again after he divided us between male and female, but then sex just made us lustful and everything like that. So I'm just like, so this is an idea that spans multiple cultures, and that's something that you've also talked about with what are those two surviving cultures that practice Gnosticism today?
Yeah, the Mendeans are probably the most obvious one, and we can more and more scholars are finding they can trace them back to probably even pre-Christian times. But then you've got the Yazidi, obviously have a lot of Gnostic elements. You've got, of course, in Islam, you've got Sufism, which is strongly Gnostic, and even today you've got the Kabbalah and Judaism, which is
Have you ever talked to any of those, or a representative from any of those groups?
I've talked to somebody who's part of the Druze. That's also kind of, they're supposed to be Muslim, but they're not. They're more Neoplatonic, Gnostic, and they live in Lebanon. I've talked to a member of that, but no, I've never interviewed a Mandean or Yazidi, just scholars.
Okay. And I was checking out your interview that you had just published today. I only got about 30 minutes into it, but I thought it was really interesting about how you included gematria in the intro. And you talk about Jesus and Lucifer potentially being birthed from Sophia. And isn't it very Gnostic where they could be one and the same? Because I know Jordan Peterson and people have called him a Gnostic about how he says we're both. I don't know if he's directly said this, but something like this, that we're both Jesus and Satan at the same time. We have the potential for both, which resonates very Gnostic to me. But then knowing gematria, I'm a big follower of Zachary K. Hubbard, and Lucifer and Jesus Christ both equal 74. So it's that when you said that Sophia birthed them both, I'm like, well, maybe they're one and the same. Like Jordan Peterson talks about how we have, the goodest of intentions and also the darkest of evils in us warring at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, Peterson's influenced by Carl Jung, and Jung, obviously, his ideas and theories have Gnosticism as a foundation. So that's going to happen. And as Jung said very wisely, everything casts a shadow. As soon as you have God, God will have a shadow, because God is a totality of something. Just as you're a totality and I am, we cast shadows. We have a dark aspect. So Satan is definitely he would be the shadow of Jesus or the shadow of God. And as Joseph Campbell said, all the gods, all the universes are within us. Again, as above, so below. So all these archetypal energies and cosmic forces are within us and playing and manifesting. And these, again, go back to archetypes, and the way archetypes are thread together are through the great myths and through the movement of the stars. I don't know how Jesus would be 74. I always thought Jesus in Gematria was 888, but at least Greek Gematria.
Well, in Manly P. Hall's Secret Teaching of All Ages, the ciphers that he introduces, full reduction by taking the numerology of each word. So, J being whatever letter, the 10th letter, whatever it is. So the numerology of Jesus would be, I don't know. yeah. So I mean,
It is a classic book.
Yeah.
Again, more than one school of thought.
Mm-hmm.
And the Kabbalah has its own numerology because it's based on the Hebrew letters, not the Greek letters. So
Yep.
It all depends.
Yeah, I just actually, my last episode was with Zachary K. Hubbard, and he's the guru, and he's written one book that was 800 pages, and his newest one was almost 400. So I mean, he would be able to answer all of those questions. I just find it supremely fascinating. I've been following him for like 3 years, and the way that the numbers always line up, and it's always X amount of days, and the person's name equals the exact amount of days that they died from their birthday, and yada yada yada. But I just thought it was really interesting about how Lucifer and Jesus both equal 74, and how you saying they were birthed from the same mother. I just thought that was interesting that they're potentially brothers. But what were the origins of Gnosticism? How did they come about, or the Gnostics, I should say?
They were brought down from a spaceship. No, just
Yeah, okay.
They had black Nikes on. No, and the Heaven's Gate is Gnostic. I hate to say this. Well, like anything, the origins have been debated. Mainstream scholarships think they sprouted out from Christianity, probably a generation after Jesus. Although if you read Paul is very
Mm-hmm.
If you can get rid of all the conditioning and all this fake epistles and all that, he talks about. I mean, he talks about Archons, the god of this world, the wisdom of the Sofia of this age, or the holy wisdom. We would say. I mean, he's got it all. And the Gnostics thought Paul was just. He was like, "Ooh, this guy, he's got gnosis. He knows this world is ruled by angels and the powers and principalities and all that." So, but I would lean more towards even older. This might be a primordial tradition, a goddess tradition of Ashira or Anat or even Ishtar. That was a sort of shamanistic, mystical tradition that existed. Back when the Hebrews were around before the exile and the Babylonian captivity. At the very least, what I think is the best model is you had these ancient priests, Egyptian priests, and they held and they had obviously the knowledge of the Egyptian mysteries, Osiris and Hermes and Thoth and all that. And a lot of dissatisfied Jews would go to Alexandria in Egypt, and they would start hanging out with these priests who would teach them all these ancient mystery religions, these Egyptian mystery religions. And these Jews started combining their ideas and lore of the Old Testament with these Egyptian myths, and suddenly Gnosticism and Hermeticism would rise up, and probably before the days of Christ, I would say. So I think that's a theory I lean towards these days, and obviously has other influence. It's got Zoroastrian influence, it's got Middle Platonic influence, but I think that's the best model I can think of.
And I've heard you reference Yali or Bali, or is it just Yali Bali?
That's just a nickname for the name. The name, one of the names of the Demiurge that the Gnostics used was Yaldabaoth, and nobody knows what it means. It's the original Gnostic texts that we find are in Coptic, but they were probably originally written in Greek. And Yaldabaoth makes no sense. It doesn't sound Hebrew, it doesn't sound Greek, it doesn't sound Coptic or Latin. Some have said Yaldabaoth means son of chaos, because that's what he was. He is the architect of the Matrix, sort of ruling over this virtual reality crappy software that we called the universe. So my sort of like cute name for it, and I think I got it from somebody years ago, is just Yaldi Baldi. You gotta give cute names to your villains.
Gotcha. Well, that kind of makes me think of, there was one ancient civilization where they had the name for some kind of entity called it was something like Zoomzine, and it wasn't a word that they had in their entire vocabulary, but when they were asked why they called these things that, is because that's how their language sounded. So when these entities would talk to them, they'd have no idea what the hell they were saying, but it sounded like a Zunzine kind of thing. So that's what they called them, the Zunzines. And then, when you say that the name makes no sense, Yaldabaoth, maybe when they were astral traveling, they were confronted with, this is the actual name of the Demiurge.
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, a lot of these names were from visions. They make no sense. They had power. Interesting about the Zunzi, because obviously in ancient times, Beelzebub, however you want to pronounce him, he was called the Lord of the Flies, because when the priests were summoning this god for divination, one of the ways you knew the god was there, or that his presence was there, or you were reaching an altered state of mind, was he would hear flies buzzing in your ears. It means you were there. I know today we think Beelzebub was like the devil, but he actually was sort of a completely separate god than Satan in ancient times. And a lot of the Gnostic texts have a lot of sounds. I think, as some have said, vocal chants will make you have an altered state of consciousness. You can go into trance if you're just going, in the right magical combination with the right ritual. And even in the text, their text was just a lot of Z's, like and then we invoke Sofia. Yeah, I mean, our minds will react to certain vowels and chants. We will go into an ecstatic state, and obviously they had tried it many times in the past until they figured out how to do it, and obviously the priests of Beelzebub did it too.
So let's start talking about entities that you wouldn't want to mess with, because before you said that, I would have said, when you were saying, oh, the flies are coming, it's like, okay, well, I mean, that's a telltale sign. I've heard people pick up these kind of left-hand path books where they do these incantations. The next day they wake up, the room is swarmed in flies. They lose their job. Their life starts falling apart. It's like they had no idea what they were really calling upon when they were doing this incantation. So if Beelzebub is not one, I heard you talking about what's that really good horror movie that came out? Hereditary. You're like, oh, they used a real demon. I'm like, well, what demon is that?
I can't remember. This demon is found in grimoires. I mean, these grimoires, or you watch movies like, what's that name? What's the name? A Dark Song.
I was going to ask you about that movie. I just watched that a few months ago.
Yeah, these grimoires are real. These entities are all coded, and how to summon them, what they can do for you, and all that. But I know with the Gnostics, yeah, you get into, they wanted to know the names and overcome these beings, not to make them do stuff on Earth, material stuff. Although they do have, like, you do find Gnostic gems and scrolls with healing spells and all that, but this is more folk magic. They wanted to travel the different levels of reality, because to the Gnostics and to the ancients too, the universe was layered into heavens and dimensions. And one Gnostic teacher said there's 365 dimensions. We're at the lowest dimension. We are like, we're shit, and we have the God of the Old Testament ruling over us. They wanted to cross all these dimensions, the planets, the stars, but the only way to do it is you had to have the right magical password or spell or incantation to let that Archon not see you, that rule this dimension or universe, whatever you want to call it, and you can get through this Archon, and then you can get through the next Archon. Eventually you would reach the ultimate consciousness, or the dimension where Sophia and Jesus were, and then you could sort of commune with these higher beings and restore yourself. Some of the texts get a little weird, I must admit. Some, like around the 4th century, they're starting to command these Archons and almost like steal their power, and these guys want to become basically gods on Earth. I disagree with that. I kind of like the older Gnostics, like the times of Jesus, where you simply wanted to commune with Jesus and come back and be a better version of yourself. I think that's it. These things were not just to escape the world. The only goal is to be the best version of yourself, to be a complete human being. Being a complete human being also means being godly and divine. That's how they thought the original humans were. And to help others. I think that was their ultimate goal.
So, touching on A Dark Song again, I know that you've said that you used to dabble with ritual magic, correct?
Yeah, a long time ago.
Long time ago, over a decade ago, correct?
Yeah, definitely over a decade ago.
So, but you also says, like, it definitely works, right?
I would say it worked for me, but the problem is that there's always a blowback. I mean,
That's,
free
yeah.
in this universe. Everything costs something. There are no free lunches in the universe, and there's always, a lot of these entities are like Tony Soprano. You're making a deal with a mob boss, and you're going to get screwed in the end when they come calling for the check, and you don't know how much interest they might be putting.
Mm-hmm.
So, and if you don't do the right sacrifice, because, again, nothing's free. Blood for blood, soul for soul. Depending on what kind of magic you use. So I just said I don't want to play that game. I'm not a gambler.
Yeah.
And I don't trust these entities ultimately. So I'm just gonna go to the original Gnostic way, which is just basically communicate with higher beings and try to become more human, better, divine, awake, so forth.
And really what red pilled me ultimately was the revelation that kind of this ritual sacrifice still happens today. I mean, you hear about the Mayans and you hear about all of these crazy cultures that used to practice ritual sacrifice. But then that woman who was on Alex Akiris's show, Anna Kalukas, and she talks about, you know, being ritually molested and being on a literal chopping block where they were beheading other children, and obviously the McAllister School story that Alex has gone into, and all of these other stories. When you find that out, I mean, it's because I was an atheist really up until that point, but I'm just like, well, if they're doing ritual sacrifice, you know, elites in the world, I mean, well, what are they doing it to? Because these people aren't stupid, like you reference all the time. Millionaires don't practice astrology. Billionaires practice astrology. Well, if that's the case, then there's more going on here than what we see. And so when you talk about, like, yeah, you can do this ritual magic, but there's a heavy price to pay. Well, it seems like with the right psychopath, they'll pay any price, right?
Yeah, and it usually means offering somebody else or some kingdom or land or something. Yeah, they're not going to lose something that they find precious. They'll sacrifice us or somebody else or so. But yeah, they know this stuff works. The Nazis knew this stuff works. The Communist Party knew this stuff worked. I mean, this is a tale as old as time. It's been happening in every generation, and it's not going to stop because, again, the elite, they know this magic stuff works. They know this Gnostic mysteries work. I think part of my show is to empower people to know that you can do your own magic or find your own inner magic or your own inner divinity. We don't have to go unarmed in these battles because, again, what did Paul say? Our fight is not against flesh and blood. It's against wickedness in high places. It's not just a material battle, but it's also a spiritual battle. So all of us should be armed with the armor of Christ, magic, gnosis, something that helps us, knowledge of how the stars work, divination tools to know how the universe is fluctuating in its energies, because again, they're using it against us and they have for thousands of years.
So I found your interview with Maximus Tyrannus Avery especially interesting. And my point of view has always been, I will never, ever, will I ever contact an entity for any reason. Because as Christopher Knowles says, he's like, you don't know what you're messing with, who you're messing with, and like you just said, you know, you're making the deal with the devil or a loan shark. I mean, you just don't know what's going to happen, so it's best to stay out of that realm. But a lot of magic or ritual practitioners say there's a safe way to do it, kind of like Gordon White. You know, he does his little magic school and everything like that. And just listening to Maximus talk about talking to the angels and me being a gnosis seeker, it's just like, oh God, if I could sit an angel in a room and just pick its brain and ask it some questions, like, who was on the grassy knoll, man? Just be like, you know, I mean, what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on that? Like, not using these entities for wealth or power or prestige or any of that, but literally just for Gnosis. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I don't know about the who's on the grassy.
Yeah, that was just a joke.
There's what your ego wants, and then what your spirit needs.
Mm.
That's the knowledge. What's going to awake you to the reality of the world, and what's going to get you to use your reason better. The Gnostics, like other groups that we're talking about, they believed in logic. They believed in historical research. They believed in using your brain, and these things could be found in the material world. So, but I think Gnosis itself is an understanding of how of the false reality of the world. But it's a process, as somebody said very wisely. Gnosis is not the destination; it is the road. It's a process of awakening, and we all awake up at different ways at a different speed. It's all not going to happen all at once, and it's definitely going to take time because there's so much to uncover about who we are and what the universe is. And some things, unfortunately, as much as I want to know, is the moon landing real? I just want to know. I know in the larger picture, it doesn't matter.
Doesn't mean shit, yeah.
If I go to a higher state, that's going to be the least of my worries. I'll be more worried about children being fed in Africa than anything.
Yeah. But I don't know, man. There's just something about it where I feel like if I were to do that, and then I was having that conversation, it would just be like, all right, so what? It's kind of like you read about playing football, you watch football, you do all these things, and you love football. But when you put on the pads and you put on the helmet and you go out on the field and you get run over, and you're just like, holy shit, like this is for real. I kind of feel like it would be that kind of experience. So I don't know if you just.
A lot of Christian and Abrahamic religions, you have faith and then you hope you go to heaven. With Gnosis, you aren't meant to have an experience in the here or now. You're supposed to understand what heaven feels like. A lot of the Gnostic texts actually say you do not wait till you die to be resurrected. You have to be resurrected while you are alive. You're following what Jesus did because you are Christ. We are Christ. We all have the mind of Christ, as Paul says. So that's also an important thing, is you have to experience everything that needs to be experienced, both as a human and a divine being.
We're all going through the hero's journey.
Whether we like it or not. We're all going to wake up. It's how much pain do you want to hold on to, and how long you want to take to do it. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, that's so interesting, man. I mean, I think about that a lot. I have this Christian friend, and I was just like, man, like, I don't know, like, if there is a heaven, like, I'm definitely going to purgatory or something. Like, I remember Sam, I think it was on your guys' podcast on Tinfoil Hat, talking about the life review, and Sam was just like, he's like, oh my god, I don't want to be a part of that, because the life review will be playing while you're judging yourself, and he's just like, oh, that right there, ooh, I can't explain that one. Like, we've all got some of those moments, and so.
Yeah, very cringy stuff. I do that. I'm lying in bed, and I'm like, oh, I can't believe I did that 5 years ago.
But I mean, that's all a part of the hero's journey, right? I mean, you have to make the mistakes in order to learn from it.
Yes, and as a human being who is both heaven and hell, Satan and God, we all have within us to do bad things, and we're all going to do bad things. That's the struggle. But we must integrate our shadow. We must integrate these dark forces, and we have to understand them. Why did it happen? Why did I do this? It's a process. It's a hero's journey, but it's better than sitting around blue-pilled for the next 5 million years or whatever the hell.
Mm-hmm. You had made a comment on one of your shows that, or maybe it was a different show that you were appearing on, but you had said that there wasn't really any hardcore proof that the Knights Templar were into occult practices. Did am I remembering that correctly?
To an extent, I would read, and I need to reread it. I think it's been like 5 years. But Tracy Twyman,
Yes.
Alex Rivera's Baphomet, Temple Mysteries Unveiled. Tracy and Alex make a very good case, but they come from a sort of they're using different archaeology. They're using a lot of literary and names, how names are passed down, and they use very on the fringes scholarship. But at the end of the day, I think they make a very good case. I feel. Others may disagree. Get the book. Really good book. It even covers Gnosticism, Baphomet. It goes through the history, this occult history. Basically, it's kind of exposing Sofia as the villain, the dark side of Sofia, what these people were worshiping. That's what Baphomet means, the baptism of Sofia. But this is, again, the dark sort of Kali version of Sofia. But from mainstream scholarship, again, they find nothing occult or mysterious about the Knight Templars, except for that they use the seal of Abraxas to protect their treasures, and Abraxas is obviously a very, very magical name.
And that's exactly what I was going to bring up. Was Tracy Twyman's work, and about a year ago, or actually 2 years ago now, I was going balls to the wall with Tracy's work. I was supremely interested in Baphomet. I just wanted to find out more about it. That it was such like that there wasn't a lot there, but Tracy had this treasure trove of information, and so I went down the Tracy Twyman rabbit hole. With all the Baphomet stuff, and I mean, the weirdest things started happening in my personal life because I was feeding so much energy into this idea or entity, and so there was one night where my girlfriend and I were sleeping in bed. I randomly wake up, and she's right in my ear, and she's just like, Baphomet. And I was like, I shake her awake, and she's like, what? I'm just like, do you know what you just said? She's like, no, I have no idea. And then I look at my phone, and it's 2:24, which that means a minute ago when she said it was 2:23 in Gematria. 2:23 equals the synagogue of Satan, and I was mind blown. I was all freaked out. And
You didn't want to go chase these entities, these loan sharks, and there you are.
yeah, and there I am because I have to know, man. I just wanted to know so much because it was just so interesting to me. And then,
Like Chris Knowles, even researching these things,
yes,
bring them into your life, an aspect, a sliver of their energy, and it upends everything, disrupts everything.
and I had several other weird experiences during that month and a half where I was just, almost every day listening to an interview that Tracy Twyman was doing or reading some of her stuff, and just like weirder and weirder things kept happening, and I was like, I'm done with this. I'm putting this on the shelf. And then just recently, I start getting this interest in it again, and I'm just like, do I really want to open up that can of worms again? But in your experience, like you just said, giving even energy or thought, excessive amounts, can empower these entities.
Yeah, it's an interactive universe. It's like Neil Gaiman's American Gods. Sometimes they just need our attention to gain power. It's it's interactive. It's not like a god appears like it's depicted. It will appear depending on our cultural background, where we are in life. But at the end of the day, they want something from us. And sometimes it doesn't have to be our soul said it would be safe.
Yeah.
You know, was Luke Skywalker safe ever? No. He was always in trouble.
So, you talked about the Matrix. Just to paint a better picture for people, I guess. What are some other Gnostic movies? Obviously, The Truman Show is a great one, probably, or the second best embodiment of Gnosticism, other than The Matrix.
No, Dark City would probably be best.
Oh, really?
Yeah, definitely see Dark City. Westworld Season 1. Some are surprised, but I'd say watch the Lego movie, the first one. Completely Gnostic. I have a feeling the new series WandaVision is going to have a very Gnostic twist because it's got that Pleasantville. Pleasantville's another Gnostic movie, kind of Truman Show vibe. So, yeah, those are the Wizard of Oz has a Gnostic vibe. You can say the Wizard is the Demiurge and so forth. Dorothy is the fallen Sofia. I mean, obviously Frank Baum was a theosophist, so you can see the elements there. What other Gnostic movies? God, there's so many and so many good ones. But I think I've named pretty much the big ones right now.
Terminator was.
No.
Oh no, that was your cyberpunk episode that you did with Gordon White.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were just talking about cyberpunk. It wasn't necessarily Gnostic movies.
Yeah.
Of course, The Fifth Element, you could say is Gnostic because Lilu definitely is a cipher for the fallen Sophia, how she restores the world and wakes up everybody. The big killer planet is obviously the Demiurge, the anti-life creature. So yeah, you could put The Fifth Element having strong Gnostic elements. What's the name of the film? Jupiter Rising. That's another one. That's so basic. I mean, that even has the House of Abraxas. That was just too obvious. Sometimes you want something a little bit more subtle.
So we keep name dropping Abraxas. As far as your understanding, what is Abraxas?
Oh man, we would have to do a complete show on it. I can't.
He's the god above gods.
To some, he is. Some Gnostic accounts had him the god above God. There's magical papyri where, yeah, he is the first thought of the universe, and he sort of laughs the universe into creation. I guess he sees everything. He knows anybody wakes up that what the absurdity of being consciousness is, and he laughs everything. But in some Gnostic accounts, he's the chief archon. He is the Demiurge, the ruler of all that is material, and he is the supreme being, but he's still the ruler of the material and ethereal and sublunar dimensions. So it's hard to say, and obviously his name was used in a lot of magical spells, magical amulets, his depiction. So he was definitely a being of that sorcerers and magicians looked for in ancient times, or those practicing magic. But there's many versions of Abraxas. I think Carl Jung ultimately saw him as the Demiurge, or the sort of Kali destruction principle of the universe. So yeah, it depends. Again, like Baphomet, it's mysterious. I think as Steve D, this chaos magician, said, Baphomet and Abraxas are unfinished gods. We are discovering them. Seekers are discovering these gods throughout time, little by little.
So, I want to be respectful of your time. It's 9 o'clock, or it's getting to be 9 o'clock over here. So I know, you got a job to do, you got a family to take care of. But if you could just give your thoughts on the times that we're facing right now and the Gnostic thoughts on how we persevere through these troubling times.
Well, I would say it's obvious that Gnosis works, because if the Gnostics posited that reality was very brittle, very fluid, and that there were shadowy creatures that seemed to be manipulating us, I Truman Show are truer than ever in some sense or another. I mean, I don't want to go literal, but I could say allegorical, symbolical, whatever. So, I mean, the Gnostic solution is always the same solution. You've got to get rid of your ignorance. You've got to go in. As Peter Gabriel sang in the Carpet Crawlers, you got to get in to get out. I mentioned all the gods, all the universes are within us. The key is within us. As the Hermetic axiom says, we are in the universe, but our universe is also in our head, as above, so below. So the answer, the divinity is within us. It's really the best we can do. The Archons are going to do what the Archons are going to do. They're going to try to manipulate. They're going to do whatever they can to keep you ignorant, whether it's through fear or material attachments. They seem to have been up the ante in this era, although they might be overplaying their hand, so they're exposing themselves, because now it seems everything is a bad copy of a bad plot, of a bad historical event that happened, but it just kind of sucks. It's not even, it's so transparent and clumsy and ham-fisted, so it's almost like they're losing their grasp on things. So I always say this may not be the best time to be alive, but it's the best time to be awake, because if you can really look in, if you can really face the horror of what's out there, you're going to find that philosopher's stone within you, and you're going to find that others are also waking up, that the veil is cracking. The code in the matrix has a lot of glitches. So this is a great time to be awake, and this is the solution is the same. Go inward and go beyond the stars, and you'll be fine in any era. Don't let fear dictate what you should do. As Dune says, fear is the mind killer. You don't want to have your mind destroyed or be numb, because others need you. Other people need you, and you've only started reaching your potential.
Yeah, well,
as James True very wisely said, this is not a battle between good and evil. This is a battle between you and the lack of you. So find out who you are, because we're all amazing. We're all in the image of a divine imagination.
and then we come full circle. Know thyself. If you take it in a positive light.
Right. Or maybe know your place. It could mean each of us has that true will of dilemma. Each of us has a duty, and the problem today is that nobody wants to do what their duty or will is. If everybody would find the order, then as human beings, like other animals, we'd be in harmony. We'd just be doing our things in harmony instead of always trying to undercut and overreach and not accept how the world is. So maybe there's nothing wrong with that.
Well, that is what the Archons plague us with. So, well, I very much appreciate your time tonight, Miguel. I love your podcast, Aeon Byte, and I'm definitely going to become a member, because, believe it or not, I just started listening to Aeon Byte maybe a month ago, and I've just been...
It seems like you're a veteran.
Yeah, right, man. I've been pile driving through it. I can't get enough. I come home and I talk my girlfriend's ear off, and she's like, "What's this Demiurge and Archon?" And I'm just like, "It's so interesting." Like, because you say that, the Gnostics were the original conspiracy theorists. Like, that Gnosticism is about conspiracy. It's about, we're all being tricked.
Crazy. They were the church fathers and the government said you guys are a bunch of crazy anarchist nutballs. They really thought the Gnostics were an existential threat to the empire through the government, through the churches, and of course they were right, because once people act individually, and they are individuals, and they can depend on their own intelligence and will, and you don't need an intermediary for you and God, or you and a better life, then yeah, you are a danger to society. So, but yeah, they were mocked as conspiracy theorists
And outcasts, and I wouldn't rather be associated with any other group than the outcasts, the nutballs, and everything like that. But if people want more, it's thegodabovegods.com, correct?
Yeah, thegodabovegods.com, or type in Aeon Byte,
Fantastic. Well, thanks for talking to me tonight, Miguel. And I can't wait for the next edition of The Desert of the Real. How was that? Was that any good?
Awesome. Getting there. The voice of God booming over the waters.
All right, man. Well, you have a great night.
All right, appreciate it. Thanks. It was fun.
Bye.